Hi, Michelle again. It has come down to the wire, but we are going to finish up the Toltec Mounds book discussion today. Technically, I am going to leave out the last chapter, chapter 14, because it's kind of a summary of what we know at this point, which is a little bit old. And Dr. Ford, who is our current station archaeologist at Plum Bayou Mounds, is going to be giving a presentation on Saturday night, the 1st of June, about what we know and what we're going to be learning this summer at the training program. So I'm hoping to record that. I'm not sure how good the audio will be, but hopefully I'll record that and get that up a couple days after that, so you'll know what's going on there and what we currently know, even more current than what's in this book. So today we're going to go over chapters 11 and 13, which are Mound B, and then the Plaza and Lakeshore area. And that kind of sums up all of the excavation work that has gone on in the past at the site. So Mound B, see on the map, it is one of the two really big mounds. It is 38 feet tall, so it's the second tallest. Mound A, right on the lake, is the actual tallest mound. But Mound B, they did some excavation on because it had damage from erosion. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So in 1883, Edward Palmer was at the site. We've talked about that before. But he went to the top of the mound, and there were some potholes on top of the mound at that point. And so he dug down into one of those and dug an 8-foot by 10-foot kind of shaft down into the top of the mound, and found that there was, for the first about 2 feet, a black sticky clay kind of soil, and then underneath that he found a yellowy clay, and that went down about 8 more feet. So down to the bottom of that 10-foot shaft. So 10 feet, that didn't get to the bottom of the mound by any stretch, but that's how far he went. He didn't find any evidence of burning or any layering in that clay as far as his records go, but he did find 2 pieces of crystal, probably crystal quartz. He also noted that there was a probable borrow pit that was used to build the mound to the northeast of the mound, and that borrow pit wasn't there anymore when the state bought the property, but it was noted as having been filled in by the property owners prior to that in the 60s. So we do know that that was a low area, and it does seem like that probably is where part of the fill used to build the mound came from. But in 1979, Martha Rollinson and some of her other staff did some excavation on the mound. Like I said, there was an erosional scar on the side of the mound, and so they cleaned up that scar so that they could see a profile. And I'll put a photo here of kind of what the profile drawing looked like, the layers that they saw. So it's about a 45-degree slope up the mound, so you can't just, I mean, I guess you could, but not very safely just dig a diagonal trench. So what they did was they excavated in like 2-meter wide sections kind of down, so stair-stepping down in that erosional scar, so that they could see a profile wall on the west side of that scar where they had a better kind of wall already left from the erosion that was pulling stuff down. So that has now been repaired. It was repaired by state park staff before the park opened. So when you go out, you don't see a big scar on Mound B, but it was there, and that's how we have some of this information without doing more damage to a mound by doing excavations into a part that is not already damaged. So they profiled the west wall of that. You've seen that profile drawing. In 2-meter sections. They did see in that there was basket loading that was used to build the mound, which is expected. That's what we've seen at the other mounds at this site so far. And we do see that there are layers that were built up that are pretty sterile and don't have very many artifacts in it. And then there are other layers that are midden layers, essentially. So there are artifacts and charcoal and things like that in those layers. Those are made by basket loading too, but then they seem to be kind of smoothed over the surface of that more sterile soil that's built up. They did find 3 features or midden layers in the section that they did do the excavation and see the profile wall of. and they did take flotation samples of those features and take the artifacts out of those features. And so what they did see was those same types of artifacts, so a lot of those grog-tempered sherds, lithic flakes, things like that. But some of the things that they found that made it a little bit more interesting than just everything we've been seeing is they found daub, which is kind of a silty clay with grass impressions in it that's been burned. They found dirt dauber nests. And so those two things are a little bit different because typically those indicate that maybe there was a structure there. Dirt daubers, if you're around Arkansas at least, you know they build their nests kind of on walls or on ceilings and things like that. So for there to be a dirt dauber nest that was burned kind of indicates that there was something there for them to build that nest on, right? So they didn't find any actual structural features, but they do have this evidence that maybe there were some buildings on Mound B. And then again, the flakes, the flora, the fauna. So they did flotation, like I said, and they found animal bones and the same kind of plant remains that they found in other parts of the site. So there may have been some food preparation going on as well on this Mound B on some of these different levels. And then in the 1980s, they did some excavations at the base of the mound to kind of get an idea of how big the mound was and see if anything else was down there. And actually, they didn't really get a good idea of the spread of the mound, but they did find some interesting features in that they found one hearth feature that they could see the soil was burned underneath it. It had ash and charcoal in it. But then they also found some other areas where there just kind of seemed to be piles of ash and charcoal, but the ground itself was not fired or burned. So they didn't really explain what they thought that might have been, except that obviously things were being dumped there, but they weren't being burned in place. So why was that happening? Don't know, but kind of interesting that that was happening off of the actual mound, but in the vicinity of Mound B. They weren't very far from there. And they did take 2 radiocarbon dates, one from one of the mound feature layers and then one from the hearth that was found at the base of the mound. And on the mound, the kind of mid-level feature, there were 3, the middle one, it dated to about 800 to 900 CE. And then the hearth at the base of the mound, that charcoal dated to about 760 to 850 CE. So fairly contemporary, depending on the exact range. But so again, that's kind of what we know about Mound B. We don't know a ton because there was no good research question that could have been answered by possibly destroying the mound by digging into it. So they just took advantage of an erosional scar to get what information we could without doing major damage by really digging into the mound. And like I said, that's been repaired, so you can't see it when you go out there anymore. But so we did get some information, and then we have that historical information from Edward Palmer as well. So now we'll jump to chapter 13. So chapter 13 is about the plaza and the lake bank and the excavations that were done. And these were done in, the 70s and 80s. There wasn't a lot of geophysical work being done yet. They did do a little bit, but not to the extent that we do now. And so a lot of these excavation units were kind of put in randomly and purposefully randomly. So we have a lot of just random data from this. So historically, we know that the Plaza area, it was a really great farmland because it was a little bit higher. So it stays a little bit more dry. Some parts of the site up to the north get a lot more wet when it rains and they hold water more because they're a little bit lower. So we know that this part was plowed a lot because it was used as farmland. So they did, when the park, or when they started to become a park and the state bought the land, they did plow up the whole area of the plaza and do a surface collection. But of course, people had been surface collecting that site for a long time. Every spring when it would get plowed and it would rain, people would collect things. So an interesting thing that they found was that they didn't find a ton of artifacts in kind of the open plaza area, but then they found more artifacts as they'd get nearer to mounds, which makes some amount of sense. We know the mounds were eroding. We know that the area was already being surface collected. So, that's didn't tell them a ton, this piece. So then they did some excavations. And like I said, they put in kind of random excavation units. So they found, again, even in the excavation units, fewer artifacts in the center of the plaza when they put in units. But then more in units that were nearer to mounds. So that kind of says that maybe there wasn't so much activity going on in the plaza that would leave artifacts behind. So like living activities, things like that. People were doing those maybe closer to the mounds. Is this due to surface collecting? Maybe, but they were digging excavation units at this point. So one thing that they were looking for or wanted to consider is, was the plaza ever covered by a flood deposit? So were there midden layers underneath a flood deposit? And that turned out not to be the case. The area had always been higher, which might be why it was the area picked to be the plaza and have mounds built around it. So people that built Plum Bayou did not build this area up. It was already a high area, and there's nothing underneath any of the natural soil layers to indicate that there was a big flood that covered anything else up. So this is just a high area, people lived on it, and then built other structures on top of it. So the other thing to note here is that all of this data is a little bit contaminated because it has been plowed for years and years, and they definitely see evidence of plowing all the way to 25 centimeters deep in some of these units, and that's 2.5 levels of archaeology as we do archaeology now. So a lot of those top layers are very mixed context. So you're seeing some of the shell-tempered sherds, you're seeing the grog-tempered sherds, and it's all just mixed up in there. So anything that was separatable at some point isn't really anymore. And then, of course, the mounds have all been plowed. We talked about them individually. They've been plowed over, or they've eroded down. Even Mound A, which is the biggest mound, I think it's 49 feet tall. It's right on the lake. And it has worn down, even though it wasn't itself plowed over because it is so big. Because it was plowed around the edges, erosion has happened into the lake and then onto the site farther as well. So they definitely were finding shell-tempered sherds in the plow zone across the plaza. There was at least one human burial, probably a woodland burial, but they weren't totally sure, found in the plaza. And then they did find quite a few what they think are post hole features. So they're pretty small, about 30 centimeters across. They seem to be round and have a flat bottom. They're filled in with a different color soil than the soil that's around them, which is how they identified them. And so they think they were probably post holes that had a post in them and the post was pulled out. But again, like I said, so these are random units that were put in across an area. So they're just finding one post hole here, one post hole there. So probably there were some buildings or something, but they don't have enough like data in a row or excavation units lined up to be able to tell us any of that. They just know that there were some probable post holes across the area. So that's interesting, but doesn't tell us a whole lot unless we go back and kind of expand those excavation areas. And then the other thing they did is, if you've been to Plum Bayou, you know that there was a kind of dock sort of structure that went out over the lake, and it's now been taken out. But when they were putting it in, they did some excavation beforehand to make sure that putting those piers down to build it wouldn't damage any archaeological features. So they put in 2 trenches on the southwest and northeast of Mound A, that big one on the lake. And in the southwest trench, they did find distinct layers, and some of those layers were pretty solidly undisturbed woodland layers. So they got some good data about the woodland context there, the woodland deposits. But those upper layers were more mixed due to erosion off the mound from water levels changing, and just people using it over time. And they found historic artifacts as well as Mississippian and woodland mixed in those upper layers in that southwest trench. But then in the northeast trench, they found again some of those distinct layers of soil, but they also found much more disturbance and mixing in the actual kind of layers. They could see the color changes of the layers, but they could also see a lot more mixing going on in there. So there was a lot more erosion. This was a lower area that seemed like maybe an erosional kind of ditch as well going to the lake. So again, you could see the soil layers somewhat, but you could also see that they were mixed, and the artifacts were a lot more mixed, with historic Mississippian and woodland artifacts all being mixed together. So The Southwest Trench, they did get a lot more data. In the Northeast Trench, it was pretty mixed data. They couldn't really say a whole lot, but they were able to get enough out and clear enough space that they could build that kind of overlook of the lake for people to walk on, which is now gone and may be back at some point. So I know those were really quick overviews of these two areas, but I wanted to make sure we got the book done before we started the training program. So I hope you enjoyed this. I've really enjoyed doing this. I'm thinking maybe we could continue doing it with other books published by the survey. Just go through them chapter by chapter. Let me know what you think about that. Hopefully I will see you at the training program. If you're not coming to the program itself, registration is closed now, so you can't come officially, but we do have an open day on June 7th. So we would love to have people come out. You can do some tours, you can do a self-guided tour. Everyone there will be happy to talk to you about what we've been doing that first week, what we've learned so far. It should be open from about 8:30 to 2:30. We'll have our lab open, we'll have the excavation areas open for people to come and look and see what we're doing and talk to all of our volunteers and our staff. So I hope to see you there. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey of this big old book. I've learned a lot. I hope you've learned a lot, and maybe we'll do it again soon. All right, talk to you later. Bye.